Good morning, good day, good afternoon. We are going towards a small space. I hope it's going to be short. On the subject of potential negotiations, I'm going to open the space by immediately saying that there is no chance for negotiation within the short term, which is at least 3 to 6 months, mostly due to something that we already explained in multiple spaces with a couple of guys, snag, trapped, whoever. That is that the Russians haven't returned a series of positions that they want absolutely done for before any kind of negotiation can start. As I already explained, those negotiations, as a strict minimum, have to do two things. First of all, to save any kind of illusion, or to save the Ukrainians for any kind of illusion that they're going to sever the Crimean Bridge, and they are not going to start without the west of Donetsk being completely cleared and the Ukrainians more or less at the Oskol. If these three stages here are done, which is Ukrainians back at the foothills of Zaporozhye, Ukrainians 20, 30 kilometers away from Donetsk, and Ukrainians at the Oskol. Without those three elements, there is no starter. The negotiations are no starter. The negotiations, however, I'm going to check them on both sides. We're going to start with the Russian side because it's the side which I back in this, as I said, already hot negotiation. The foreseeable future and also what we can see from the Russian military strategy right now is that, and I already told this, is to create in short term at least a buffer of 20, 25, 30 kilometers from Donetsk, from where normal artillery cannot reach. This would facilitate a lot of the logistics within that area and allow the Russians to push forward in a way more interesting way than we have ever seen so far. So that was the one I explained. Basically, it's a tactical military phase in 3 steps west of Donetsk. First step is the hook between Ugledar and south of Advivka. Then you have Advivka until more or less Konstantinovka, and then you have the northern bit, Konstantinovka, Kramatorsk, and Slovyansk, and of course then around the Kharkov Oblast, which, by the way, is going probably to be vacated by Russian forces in case of negotiation, pushing the Ukrainians at the Oskil. And that's a more or less military side of the discussion. Then we're going to have the strategic side of the discussion. The strategic side of the discussion is, what does Russia need to at least think for ceasefire? Russia needs 4 things mostly. More or less a position that would allow itself to react within 24 to 48 hours to any kind of attempt from the Ukrainian side to mobilize, stage, and attack. That would mean that it would need a depth or a buffer zone, purely mechanized buffer zone of at least 30 to 60 kilometers, an artillery buffer zone of at least 60 kilometers because of the HIMARS. I know there are other weapons at ease, but unfortunately, as I said, given how this war is going on, even if you put your HIMARS at the lock, you or at the buffer, at the limit of the buffer zone, you are going to have a huge trouble advancing in mechanized columns on both sides, by the way, for a long period of time. The main two, I'd say, exceptions to this rule were Russian advance between May and July, and the counter offensive in Kharkov by the Ukrainian side. So basically, on that aspect, that's the first part. The second point, that what the Russians need a Ukrainian state that cannot recover its GDP. That's I'd say, the economic part and the strategic part as well. But this is more an economical part. Cannot recover its GDP within 10 years minimum. This, they've done it properly. With this aspect, reconstruction in Ukraine is going to make everything cost twice as much as it should cost. This, of course, in another sense, is going to be covered by UN funds. If there is a ceasefire, the third point is also Russia recovering most of its frozen assets. And for that one, that's the third part, I'm going to have a special space based on the multiple mechanisms that the EU, especially the EU, but the US as well, are going to try and dilute those funds and try and retain them as much as possible in order for Russia not to be able to recover a decent cash flow, liquidate whatever it can, because I would also put in danger Western positions when it comes to those funds. As I'm going to post a article from 17th of November that shows that debt gobblers, especially on the American side, from developing or third-party countries, including the EU, are gone. Like nobody is rushing now to buy US debt or Western debt. This is the biggest problem here, and that's why I think those $317 billion that have been frozen, actually only 87 billion have been frozen and are liable to seizure, but let's say 317 are probably not going to be let go without a proper deal between both parties. And that one, if the Russians insist on this third point of recovering their direct asset losses, could be a bit of a challenge to avoid having to compromise on core points. And then the fourth point is something that unfortunately a lot of you people are not going to like, and I didn't want to say it, but I'm going to say it. Fourth point is that the demographic dynamics for the Ukrainian side cannot recover within this century. It's extremely, difficult to say it like this, because the whole point of this war was, as I said, a kind of negotiation between two big parties, NATO, US on one side, and Russia on the other side. This, unfortunately, was put to something else. In the Middle Ages, you had what were called judiciary combat, ordalies in French. So in this case, this is exactly what happened. We're having a combat who is supposed to bring judgment on which side is on the side of God. Back in the Middle Ages, but is on the side of the march of the historical dynamic. In this case, unfortunately, NATO chose, I think, the worst partner, because, as I said, it didn't have most of the infrastructure that could have allowed it to hurt Russia even more, and also it is in a very problematic strategic location. As I said, Russia, having taken Crimea, had the time to prepare for a very good and positive plan on how to seize Kherson and move forward. It half achieved that, but that half is now exactly the half that is making this whole situation problematic for NATO. So 4 points, as I said, first of all, the purely military point of view, a couple of positions. Second point, I said, is a bit more strategic. In this case, it's a strategy economy. The GDP on the Ukrainian side, so the development of the Ukrainian state, the RAM state that will remain for the Russian side, needs to be the lowest possible. So, as we discussed, over 120 billion have been given this year, and about 113 billion have been given last year. This means that the aid, financial, humanitarian, and military, has covered more than what the actual Ukrainian GDP was for last year and this year as well. This means that right now Ukraine is a failed state, which is logical. It's being attacked by Russia. It's in the middle of war, so logically Russia is doing everything right on that aspect. I know for a lot of you people, it's like, where are the victories? This is a major victory. Ukraine cannot survive on its own. Even if war stops tomorrow, as I said, Ukraine will have to face a huge inflation spiral, which is going to probably make a lot of people rich and a lot of other people just flee the state. And this goes to the fourth point, as I said. And then third point is Russia needs to recover its assets and also needs to recover within the assets some markets. So sanctions plus funds, that's the third point. And then the fourth point, the demography of Ukraine. If a inflationary spiral, hyperinflation, whatever you want to call it, hits, as I said, you're going to have a lot of people making a lot of money. It's not going to be a majority, and then a lot of people are simply going to stop staying put, because it's not a kind of Second World War deal when you can stay, have a job, and have it worse for 1 or 2 years. No, unfortunately, the structures that you can find in Ukraine after whatever ceasefire are going to be pure hard market economy with a lot less control rules, because as you know, things will have to be and go fast. Take for that the template of the Iraqi so-called reconstruction. It was one of the most fraudulent in the world and put a lot of Iraqis to go outside of Iraq. So therefore, that is going to impact the Ukrainian demographics in a very specific way. What we hope, and this is a byproduct of the Ukrainian reconstruction, is a change of structure within the power dynamic within Ukraine. So basically, I hope that a consolidation around Zelensky's people happens so that the populations feel even more frustrated by not winning the war, secondly, having to endure the cost of reconstruction, and third, and most importantly, having to deal with the same type of despotic, I'd say, logic that Zelensky has been instilling, especially this year, making it a very difficult transition for most of Ukrainians. And this is exactly where we want to be. Ukraine needs to stagnate or to regress, generally. And that would only happen if, as I said, a couple of strategic points are concluded. Now, here is the fact that Russia needs also, and this is pertains to the second point and the first point as well, is to have Ukraine have as less as possible access to the Black Sea, if possible, within the scope of a special military operation /war/shit show, completely block Ukraine from its natural Black Sea front. So basically, Chernomorsk needs to go, Odessa needs to go, and so on, or at least cannot be used as a military base. And Russia will insist on making Odessa and Chernomorsk, etc., as free ports. This would, of course, allow a lot of shit going on there, and then turn those places into something out of a pirate bay. This, of course, will never be accepted by Ukraine, so I have no much faith into that. The only possibility is, as I said, to make those places just cease to exist. So before the end of this ordeal, Russia needs to completely erase those ports in a way or another, if it wants to maintain that logic without actually capturing the land. The only, I think, solution that Russia would accept is to keep the current Ren and Ismail ports, which have an absolutely abysmal capacity and are choked by the fact that they have to go from the southern Bug and the Danube. Therefore, as I said, reducing the capability to process, onload and download, and of course, most importantly, would have to make Ukraine completely reinvest on its infrastructure and divert it from southern Ukraine, Odessa to southern Ukraine, towards the Moldavian and Romanian borders, which, thanks to the Pridnestrovia Republic, would allow Russia to monitor the whole fluxes a lot better than it actually is doing. There we have what I say are the logics, the pointers that Russia needs to follow. On the other side, we have the pointers that Ukraine needs to follow. Most of them are the exact contrary. First of all, what Ukraine needs for a peace plan so far, and that, in my opinion, is not going to happen within 2 to 3 years, if ever, are a physical interruption of the Crimean land bridge. That, you know, it's not going to happen for various reasons. Second of all, it's a demilitarized Crimean peninsula. That would be the best case scenario. I'm not saying this is what they want. They want to recover Crimea, but right now, if they come to the table of negotiation, this is what they're going to propose, which is basically referendum within Crimea, but referendum if Russian military troops go out. This, of course, is fucking like, bro, it's a non-starter, but these are the positions that Ukraine want to have. Third point is, of course, a demilitarization of the Sea of Azov, the northern coast, which is supposed to be the Ukrainian coast from Mariupol to whatever, and therefore also their referendums with the return of the refugees within those areas, which they think are going to vote for Ukraine. So basically, Mariupol is going to return to its quote-unquote official owner. This, once again, is not going to happen. You know why. I know why. Everybody knows why. And then, most importantly, the current positions within the Lugansk and Donetsk oblasts need to return, in my opinion, of course, to at least the 2022 line of contact. This currently is impossible for Ukrainian forces. They cannot pull them back, but it could very well become possible in negotiations if, for some reason, there is a collapse somewhere within the Russian lines. This, of course, is not for this year or next year, for sure. 2025, we don't know what happens. I'm not absolutely saying that Russians will collapse, quite the contrary. I'm just saying I cannot see past 2024 for various reasons. I'm going to explain further down the road. Third point is the return of most of the refugees within Ukraine, which means also a lot of people that went to Russia. This is not under control of the Ukrainian state. They can ask for Europe to pull back people and send them back. Most of the cases, that thing is illegal within European law. If these people want to stay and have made an application to stay as whatever, have a job, are integrated, it's going to be extremely difficult to pull these people back. And that could be also a problem and backfire for Ukraine if they ask that thing. They have tried to make some inroads to at least get the men back so they can be put under the flag and get killed somewhere between Zaporozhye and Donetsk. That hasn't happened. So if we have to reciprocate the same thing, strategically is to push the Russians to specific positions, mostly in their mind is the 2022 lines. This is not possible. It's not going to happen for the moment. Second point, as I said, bring back manpower so that the state cannot doesn't stay as a rump state, because in the current logic, given that negotiations we're not going to be for a long-standing peace. Once again, this is going to be purely tactical, and it's going to last 5 to 10 years maximum. I even have the option that this is going to be just a pause in the combat, and within 2 years, both sides are going to go at it. The whole point for Ukraine right now is to be able to breathe, get people back in, press them into service, allow the West also to catch up with its production, be able to deliver at least a fraction of what the Russians can still get from their storages, not even can build them back, but from storages. And also, as I said, stabilize the finances. This is the third point, very important for Ukraine. Right now, Ukraine is in fucking 100% deficit. So everything that Ukraine gains as money goes into the fucking military, in a way or another. So when you pay the guys for your civil service, that money comes from abroad. The money that Ukraine has on its own, its taxes, are for the war fund, so-called peace fund. This is the biggest problem right now, is that we cannot see the exact expenditure that the Ukrainian state is undergoing for the war. As I said, initially they communicated on it, and you could put a finger, as I said, given how much they need to spend to keep 200,000 to 300,000 people under arms with the average cost of $1,000 per day per soldier, which is the basic. Because as I said, you think that with €5 you can keep a soldier up. You can't, because there are expenses that you need to do all over the chain that makes that it gets up. If the US in average in expedition, a projection of force is between $3,000 and $7,000, depends how far it is and what kind of projection it is: war, policing action, peacekeeping, whatever. So for Ukraine to be between 1,000 and 3,000 is completely normal. Now, the most important part, as I said, because Ukraine right now, economics is a black hole, what they need is to consolidate whatever they can, bring people back, try to return the economy to a certain sense of normalcy, recover some ports, and try to start exporting what they can. One of the biggest problems is that their biggest asset right now, export-wise, is manpower. Human resources, exactly what they can export. Okay, not in infinite quantities, but if they start a outsourcing platform, and I'm going to tell you, I've seen buses of Ukrainians in France, in Brussels, in London. These people right now, there are companies within Ukraine, Poland, and so on, who are making fucking huge bucks. If those companies can be taxed to a certain point, so basically taking part of the profits that they're making by outsourcing manpower and labor power, then Ukraine can also have a double remittance, because as you know, these people who are working abroad, most of the time they are sending remittances back. So it's a way for Ukraine to double dip. So that situation, however, as I said, is very complicated by the fact that right now Ukraine cannot let men go out. And as I told you, women have, in average, less chances to go on a working market, even if that exists, and we have plenty of cases. But men are going to be fending for themselves a lot better and are going to be more attractive for a lot of labor roles that Ukrainian women right now cannot fill. We have other labor roles for Ukrainian women, and no, I'm not thinking about OnlyFans shit and everything else, just like, this is serious discussion. All that part is something else, which also does exist, by the way, sex workers and so on. So the whole point here for Ukraine is trying to figure out how much can get from its current situation in peacetime, because wartime stops it from getting men outside. And then the fourth point, most important part, is getting money from Russia. That is, I think, where Ukraine is going to make a fuss over this
negotiations, whatever they are, because Russia is never going to agree to, first of all, see these 300 plus billion are seized. Secondly, it's not a defeated army. You only force a defeated army to pay reparations. Right now, Russia not only is not defeated, but has regained tactical initiative in almost every single area of the front, which means that for the time being, Ukraine doesn't have any kind of possibility. Now, I'm going to make maps for why I think Russia is going to go for 60 or 100 kilometers. We discussed this with Dr. Snek a couple of spaces before. But most important part where you need to check is why Russia is going for some specific areas it wants to control. We've already said that at the Oskol because it's a proper natural barrier. And if you, from the Oskol, you put 30, 60, 100 kilometers of buffer of demilitarized zone against Ukraine. This is what the Russians want. Once again, I'm not gonna think in Ukrainian terms right now because it's not 2022 anymore. It's not November 2022. So the Ukrainians right now have only the right to shut the fuck up and get killed. That's the military situation as it stands right now. Had we been last year, same time, I would say something different. But unfortunately, the Ukrainians have ceded the initiative, have expended a lot of human capital and material capital for nothing. And most important part, as I said, the West right now is not ready to refill the pot within 3 to 6 months fully. They can give other stuff, as I said, ATACMS, F-16s, a couple of more tanks, MRAPs and shit like that. But this has already been proven to be a non-starter point for a mechanized assault. On top of that, there is another point I wanted to raise at the end of the space, is that the Russians are making sure that the Zapo front is well resupplied by, as you know already, the Trans-Azov rail line that's going around along the coast. That is, I think, the end of the discussion when it comes to what you want to do towards Berdyansk and Melitopol and Tokmak and so on. The moment the Russians can use that rail line, and the moment where HIMARS cannot cut that because it's not anymore 1,600 meters of bridge, how it was in the retreat from Kherson, it's now a 155 kilometer rail yard. You can try and take out nodules, but the Russians have diesel locomotives, so really tough luck. I mean, this is one of the things I want to discuss in another space, the fact that Ukrainians, as I said, haven't made any kind of infrastructure project in order for them to facilitate resupply lines, but that's something else. So let's go down to some core points on the Russian side. Russian side are seeing a couple of things. First of all, I posted, thanks to Trapped Iron, a piece by Defense One that had put his hands on a couple of import documents where they can all see that, for instance, Ukrainians have bought ammunition via a third party, a Polish company from Switzerland, have bought ammunition for Bulgaria, and are paying premium buck. This I already explained in the previous, not the previous because it was the express, but the part 9, that Ukrainians are overpaying for their ammunition, and the allies, NATO, America, whatever, are also overpaying. This is because they are in a very specific market, and they cannot force the markets, or they cannot force their allies to undercut the prices. Why? I explained to you why. Because most of the guys who are producing, manufacturing this ammunition need to buy it on the open as well. While Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran can make this fucking common pot where Russia literally gives raw supplies to Iran, and Iran transforms them into rounds because it has the rolling stock, the capacity to do it. If you want the biggest choke point for Russia, is that it dilapidated a lot of redundant capacity it got from the Soviet Union for something pretty logical. They didn't thought that this kind of war would come within 10, 20, 30 years. In hindsight, that was a mistake, but everybody did so, so lesson learned and so on. In this case, why I want to speak about this is that you can see where the problem is for Ukraine. The problem is that they are starved for everything, and they are also forced to pay the price. Russia understands this, understands that everything that Ukraine is doing right now is eating first its fat, then its flesh, now its bone, in order to survive. And therefore, it needs to stop the fighting for at least 6 to 9 months in order to reorganize what they can do without having the threat of a Shahid raining down, calibers raining down, whatever you want. Most important part, and that's thanks to Kines, the Ukrainians have been spared so far from power outages, and the Russians are not hitting anymore the same infrastructure. I said initially that it is because there is so less to do that it doesn't really help. That was wrong. Kines helped me out with that. There's a small API that the Ukrainians have left on what is generated power and what is the consumption as well. There is an extra supply always available for the Ukrainians, so they can also sell energy abroad. And that's in great part due to the fact that their own consumption pool has been shrunk thanks to the Russian strikes, but also the war. So basically, there are less people to spread the energy around. Now, this situation for the Russian side, as I said, right now it's not very important. Russians do not need a halt right now. Ukrainians need it, and therefore that's why the Russians are pressing with a certain offensive. This means that Russians might have another type of intelligence within the Ukrainian side. You've read the articles as well. The Ukrainians, I mean, I can direct you towards Sean Walker's article about how the doom and gloom is completely embracing Kiev, and you got this guy, former transport minister, saying, "Oh, we need 300,000 to 500,000 people again. Mobilize them, get all the fucking kit for them, armor for them, planes, whatever we want. Go to the offensive. We can do it." Problem is, as I said once again, that's the wrong way of thinking this war. Why is it the wrong way of thinking this war? Is that all that will need time, as you saw it last time, in order to prepare 40,000 troops, even 63,000 troops if we take the American account. It took them from November to more or less April. And that was an ongoing process. So basically, the Ukrainian side was forming troops, shipping them out, getting them killed, reforming other people, losing material. Western was always forced to take this into account. There are major holes as well. We don't see new production of, for instance, M777s. We know that the company who makes them barrels, is full until the end of this year and until more or less June 2024, in replacement of the barrels that were already ordered by the forces in combat. This, of course, can mean that those barrels that are replaced, so it's more or less like 90 to 120 per year, are going to go straight to Ukraine. Without a doubt, I have no problem with that. But there are also losses, so we know that at least 70 are gone, in this case for the 777s, and then you need to replace them in the order of magnitude that is required. That means that you don't need to replace 70 or 120 or 150. You need to give them 1,000. And that production will take time. We also had the deal with, as I said, with 100 Panzerhaubitze 2000 that was supposed to be signed last year in June or July. The contract hasn't been signed yet, and the delivery was always supposed to last 5 years, about 20 per year. So there is just not enough hardware for what the Ukrainians say they want right now. But it could be. Everybody can just demilitarize within the EU and send that shit over, and the Ukrainians have to deal with it and find a place where to park this without getting kinjal, high march, whatever you want to call it. Therefore, the Russians, seeing this huge bottleneck, this choke point, this absolute motherfucking of a clusterfuck, are now pressing their advantage, even though, as I said, it doesn't yield huge territorial gain. The maneuver around Advivka is probably going to gain them maximum between 200 240 square kilometers, which is not much in absolute terms. But the positions where they're going to be at the end of that, if this thing pans out the way I see it, of course, there's an if, would make it impossible for Ukraine to hold equally both flanks around Advivka. So basically, they're going to have to choose either they want to keep Konstantinovka up north or they want to keep Ugledar down south. This, once again, as I said, is part of the same puzzle for me and for the Russians, but for the Ukrainians, it has huge political and negotiation value. If you lose north, you lose everything within Donbass. It's gone. You're going to lose your biggest part, your last remaining big cities within the Donetsk Oblast. And if that thing falls, then the Russians would have roughly 70% of the oblast. It's exactly what I have with Zaporozhye. It's exactly what I have with Kherson. Those oblasts strategically are as good as gone. And politically, where the fuck are you going to put your head of oblast? In Pokrovsk? Pokrovsk, if things go as usual, is going to also be within the Russian artillery in around February or March. So what exactly are you counting for? That's what I'm saying, that the Russians are doing right now gives me the impression, I said this over a month ago, even before the the offensive started in Advivka, that Russians now are going for the blow within the negotiations in mind. Once they got that, Russians need a breather as well. I'm not saying that it doesn't hurt them. They don't have losses. The problem is that Russians can still go and suffer for, as Shoigu said, until 2025. This is what Ukraine cannot do. And this is the best part of this whole charade. Strategically, Russians have enough rope for at least 2 years in the current state. So without militarizing society, without starting to cut payments, without a lot of things that unfortunately would make the war untenable for Ukraine, we would like that to be happening so the situation is closed and we can go back to memes and chair quarterbacking or Monday quarterbacking, whatever you want to fucking call it, doesn't matter. The whole point here is that the Russians are aiming at a negotiation plan. This negotiation, how it stands, is of course political, first and foremost. And the second part is that, as I said, it also causes Ukraine a huge monetary and financial loss. Why? First of all, positions of the Ukrainian army haven't progressed in the south at all. Yes, Krinky, yes, Pishanivka, yes, Cossack Alps, whatever. We see what it goes on. You got 30, 50, 80, 100, 300 guys, if you want, in these whole small villages, going hole by a hole, trying to stay alive. Of course, ambushing Russians who are sometimes trying to physically outroot them. Fine. Then, as I said, there was this ambush. 10, 12 Russians were killed or wounded. And within a couple of next days, we see videos of the PTS getting lancetted, like 12, 15 guys getting completely smashed by TOS. Another guy entering a house and getting UMPK'd. I posted a video today of 2 guys coming with a small boat, getting hit by a hate drop. one of the guys who are still like swimming in the Dnieper. Actually, it was the Konka. So, as I say, this attrition warfare at that part is not where the reality is. The reality is, unfortunately, negative a bit for Russia because it doesn't have the same liberty it had within 2022 to patrol the Black Sea. But the difference is that the Ukrainians themselves cannot enjoy anything else than just having the Russians be a lot more cautious around Black Sea. They cannot occupy the sea. They don't have the boats for them. Their strikes right now are using very expensive and literally replaceable assets for damage that I said the Russians can always fill up by whatever is at the Caspian flotilla going through the canals and pump for at least immediate replacement. Russians can do it. Now the most important part, as I said, is when you analyze the Russian position is that negotiation, yes, but in due time with enough, I'd say, background, enough analysis of the situation. And the analysis of the situation when it comes to Russia is pretty simple. What has been rolled back within the last month from the Russian push? Except for the absolute nonsense shit show at Golovka when they attacked the Terikon, they were pulled back from the first one, and then now they have the foot Terikon that they are fully occupied 3 days ago. Speaking of the Ukrainian side, there is nothing. Yes, of course, we're going to go over the Dnieper, but I'm going to also make a space about that. When you see the whole area around the Konka River, you got multiple water obstacles that you need to go through. So pontoons, fording, all that shit is impossible without getting annihilated by everything else that the Russians can throw at you. But that's another part that I said. So where it matters, Zaporozhye, no advance. They tried to push them, tried again, a couple of mechanized rush around Verbovoye, and northeast of Novoprokopivka, failed. They lost a Leopard 2R and a T-72 M1. I mean, right now, Ukraine, what they're trying to do is stay relevant to areas where they were supposed to break through this year, and also try and reduce Russian gains around the very critical front of Donetsk. That's Novomikhailovka, that's Avdiivka, that's, again, Bakhmut, Artyomovsk. As I said, it's not going to change, so I'm going to call it Artyomovsk. And that's that. Right now, Ukraine is understanding that you can stretch your legs for as long as your cover is. They did something different. They thought that by stretching them and trying to push the other guy out of the bed, it would work. It didn't. They got their legs cut, and now the only point I can do is slowly creep back to their positions, despite everything that they claim. And yes, they're going to be Russian losses, but the posture has changed, initiative has changed, and also the sense of a negotiation now has changed. We were talking about putting Ukraine in a good place in negotiations before the summer, so basically cutting or severely degrading the Crimean land bridge. Now we're talking about making sure that Ukraine doesn't give too much at the table. The narrative within the US has changed. Of course, this can be fake, can be a sense of having the Ukrainians stall and try and survive this winter before something else comes, but there is nothing in short term that can come, except of course the F-16s, that can help Ukraine do anything relevant to their fucking stated goals. On the other side, the Russians have a lot to lose with a ill-planned follow-up campaign to Avdiivka. Right now, everything points out that Avdiivka, it's a done deal. It's just going to get enough time so the Russians are not going to sacrifice 3, 4, 5, 600 vehicles like Ukrainians did for that failed counter in Zaporozhye. So, as I said, you can see that the Russians now have gone back to infantry, trying to probe, trying to see where exactly the Ukrainians are going to try and transfer troops. I showed already that the highway in Tonenke was visited. Actually, Shai Muratov pointed it first. We saw strikes around the Lastochkina road. We saw already some carcasses around that road and the bend. We have strikes again in Orlivske, in Kalovka. Like everything that is logical to expect from an attrition battle when it comes to supplying Avdiivka is there. And it doesn't seem to change that much. Therefore, that's what I'm saying. Our biggest situation and problem right now is what next after Avdiivka. I already pointed out, go through Ocheretine, take out the two major defensive clusters over there and start threatening Berezivka. This would force the Ukraine to have to choose if they want to continue the fucking shenanigans down south or they want to stop you in Donetsk. They don't have the assets. If you go to military land, they basically announced the 6th new brigade with a orbat of a reinforced battalion right now. They are trying to push as fast as possible the Abrams and the Leopard 1s to the combat. This completely lopsided type of formation that apparently the 4th Tank Brigade is going to get and the 1st Tank Brigade is going to get are not making any sense in anything else than trying to stall the Russian advance. So basically a defensive formation, which of course, as I said, could very well be what they're trying to have here. Now, our biggest problem, our biggest mistake when it comes to analyzing the notion of negotiation is what is Russia going to give away? Well, what Russia is probably going to give away, in my opinion, is a continuation of combat operations. I think this is going to be the crucial point for the US. So basically, freezing the lines to whatever the front is. Therefore, Avdiivka is extremely important because even if the lines are frozen, it would create a buffer for Donetsk and allow the Russians to have a direct outlook to the critical logistical network of the Ukrainian side. Here we're speaking purely, as I said, over strategic approaches. On the other side, Russia would ask for the stop of, I'd say, projecting its forces within Ukraine. Well, something in return. That's something in return, as I said, are two faces of the same coin. Either Ukraine abandons its claims when it comes to territorial recognition of the whole oblasts, either, and that's something completely different. And this makes me a bit more, as I said, a bit more, cautious. A demilitarization of those areas, a couple of areas that I mentioned before, so 30, 60, 100 kilometers. It would be nice, but a demilitarized area, a free military zone are two different things than actually having Ukraine cede its territorial claims. So basically just giving up the whole oblast. Ukraine is never going to accept giving up and it's not going to accept it because it holds both capital centers. It holds Zaporozhye and it holds Kherson City. Unfortunately for that, Russia has a little bit less leeway, so it has less leverage on those aspects. What it does have, though, as I said, is that Lugansk and Donetsk could be a very nice gain. It holds major centers. Lugansk, it almost holds it 100%. Donetsk, if Avdiivka is taken, I said, is going to put under threat the sister cities up north. And if Ukrainians vacate them, I have no problem seeing Russia literally rushing behind, taking over, and then saying, what you going to do to the Americans? The Ukrainians did the same in March 2022. I absolutely have no doubt the Russians are going to do that for Lugansk and Donetsk. For the rest, it's going to be negotiable, not the oblasts, but the lines. I think Russia is going to ask for those two oblasts a 30, mandatory 30 kilometer, 100%, because it would allow itself within Kherson to basically have a completely free Kherson Oblast from the Ukrainian military, and you never know what happens. They can try some huge, if the other side's military is 30 kilometers away, Russians are going to have enough time to cross back again, seize enough positions, and if the Ukrainians try to defend those positions, they're going to get slammed as well. In Zaporozhye, it's the same. If they accept a 30 kilometer, it's as good as losing Zaporozhye. 60 is even better, as I said, because it pulls the Ukrainians so far back. And therefore, I do not see the Ukrainians accepting to cede the territorial integrity of those oblasts, so accept that those are Russia's oblasts anymore. But the other solution for Russia that would work just the same is also going to be extremely difficult for Ukrainians to accept, because, as I said, it would mean that de facto they would have still lost these two oblasts. And then Russia has what it wants with as little as 30 kilometers buffer zone, and it's a done deal, no discussion. Nobody has anything to say anymore. Russia would have achieved the strict minimum of its operational goals. Then there is the very specific way to deal with Odessa and the rest of the Black Sea that's still not under Russian control. As I said, those ones are probably going to be neutral or free port areas, so without Ukrainian control, be that a third party administrating it, UN, whatever you want. That thing never lasts long enough, and Ukrainians are going to be interested into regaining those areas back and restarting the conflict, because, as I said, if they lose control on that, if you have this system like Iraq used to have oil for food or whatever you want to call it, Ukraine is going to lose a lot of proceeds from the export gateway that those areas are. So therefore, again, on the Russian side, just asking for that would be tantamount of Ukraine losing a huge chunk of what it was supposed to achieve. Third point, very important, as I said, Russia might well be intelligent enough to at least cede the part of the actual funds that are seized. So instead of getting the whole 317, leave 87 and get back 200 something else. That 87 is just not enough for Ukraine to rebuild anything else, but spend it on more military. So it's literally lost money for Ukraine. It's going to be pain for the Russians, whatever you want to call it, but it's still lost money, because given what Ukraine is going to need to reform its military, start also, because that's the part I wanted to address, but it's going to be at the end. Ukraine's capital, Ukraine's fiscal needs right now, if they want to rebound quickly enough to have another go at Russia within 5 to 10 years, need to be 150 billion a year, which means the whole GDP needs to be the state budget. That's not going to work without loans. But as I said, those loans are not going to work that way, because it's Ukraine. It's not Germany after World War II. There is no common market to help that shitty place evolve into something else. And it's a limited both market, but also a limited capacity of sending people abroad or cooperating with Ukraine. Ukrainians are sending all these signals about are they going to become a great place for Europeans to produce arms, to produce IT, to whatever. No, it's not going to work like that. Nobody's going to start putting sensitive industries at the Russian doorstep. It has never worked like that. There's a reason why Poland, despite all the fucking attempts, is still nowhere near South Korea when it comes to military development. This is the core logic here. Nobody's going to do that. Nobody is going to invest in Ukraine a fuck ton of money to make weapons when Russia can literally end that shit within 2 to 3 months, including with a nuclear strike. Of course, this is like, I'm overdoing it, but that's the whole point. Now, the interesting part in here, as I said, is the following. Russia would be well advised to just give what is frozen and identified and take out what is not really frozen, but it cannot use because of current European regulations. First of all, it would allow it to have as much as possible out of it. And for 87,000, you can still sue through appropriate channels. And then those 87 billion are not going to be used right away, because you will have a fuck ton of appeals, the counter appeals, and at the end, 5 to 10 years would have passed. That money is going to get stuck. You're not going to be able to make it, and someone else is going to be forced to foot the bill. But taking out what is not currently not seized but frozen would be more interesting, because with those 200 billion, then Russia can do something completely different. As I said, first of all, get back to the war effort. Second of all, be able to have another cushion in case of another attempted counter from the Ukrainian side, larger in scope, but also larger in backing. So basically, it would have enough cushion to defend its ruble, and so on and so on and so on. So generally, Russia would be well advised to, whatever negotiation it leads, not ask for too much. Keep its eyes on the prize, which is reducing Ukraine to its simplest denomination. And then the fourth point, as I said, making sure that Ukraine cannot rely on a repatriation of its male population. So keeping the threat open on Ukraine. Basically, Russia should never go for a definitive deal that it did with Minsk 1 and 2, and it tried to achieve early in March 2022, according to everyone. I still don't believe that was any kind of honest deal on both sides, but especially on the Ukrainian side. So, the most important part here now is to recompose also what Russia should do when it comes to the demographic deal. And that's, as I said, is to ask during the negotiations for a reduction of the Ukrainian military. The 60,000 strong Ukrainian army that the Russians asked apparently in March and before that, it's not going to happen because, as I said, nobody's going to start demilitarizing in this situation. And I also argue that it would be ill-advised for Russia to allow Ukraine to completely demilitarize, and by doing so also force Russia to accept something else that I think is going to be the only way Ukraine is going to demilitarize, which is NATO troops within Ukraine. So to me, it would be better that Russia does not agree on this smaller Ukrainian army, does not agree on limited Ukrainian assets, because the request on the other side, the counterclaim, the counter proposal will be, let's put the US umbrella over Ukraine. The point is, Ukrainians need to die for their country, it's their country, they need to defend it. Anybody else, it's a nuke job. And therefore, I'm saying the logic would be for Russia to keep the security situation for Ukraine up, have it in a heightened readiness, because, as I said, as you already know, people who spend for the military but don't use it lose that money. It rigidifies the society, it makes everything far more difficult, and also, as I said, it creates divisions within the country. And that's how you can see now, because now we're speaking about Zaluzhny against Zelensky and all this shit. The point is, they need to keep Ukraine within this paranoia that something's going to happen. Therefore, they keep spending, they keep wasting money on defense, and they keep wasting people on war. So my point is, first of all, no stop until you are on the Donbass line, so beyond the Karlivka Reservoir, when it comes to Advivka, at Kramatorsk and Slovyansk up north, and at least Ugledar down south. If we are the Russians are at that line, it's perfect. They don't need to go beyond that. If they are at Orikhiv down south, also perfect. And if the Kherson bank is clean, also okay. This would be the starter point on the map. Second point, the request, as I said, minimum a 30-kilometer demilitarized zone on the Ukrainian side, maximum 100. 100 is not going to work. For obvious reason, they would lose, the Ukrainians would lose too much territory, defensible territory. And also 100 kilometers, that means that you basically are losing Kiev. You cannot defend Kiev. This is madness. They're never going to accept that. So there you could have like a couple of negotiations, how, when, who, but I'm thinking 30 or 60 kilometers should be okay, mostly because of the HIMARS. And then the third aspect that the Russians should agree upon, but also request, is that they should have most of their cash freed right away. And the rest, they should not say you can have it. We want that first tranche. Let's see for the second part. So basically, you don't give it away, but you don't leave it untouched either. That's a common tactic, that you promise something, you get the first part, but you never sign on the second part. And then the first point, as I said, in order for Ukraine to not be able to recover fast, so point 2 and point 4, is not to go for, as we said, the 60,000 or the reduced Ukraine militarily, because Ukrainians then are going to ask for a third party to come in, and you know who's going to come with its big boots. But to say, okay, we agree that Ukrainians can be armed to a certain point. Of course, there's going to be a list of systems that they don't want there. If you have a demilitarized zone, that's the whole point. But we don't want a foreign force within Ukraine. We don't want this. Otherwise, we keep going for war. The moment that happens, you're going to see that the Americans are not going to be okay. They're going to start straight up proposing, Ukrainians are going to go to 150,000 soldiers. I guarantee you this. Because what the Americans want, and Stoltenberg said it, is to have Russia agree to a NATO presence within Ukraine. Official NATO presence that would pave the way towards NATO accession as a member state. And instead of what Stoltenberg said, that all the territories that Kiev holds, no, that doesn't exist. If Ukraine becomes a member, it's going to be within the border. So basically, it's going to be NATO-Russia open warfare. And EU, it's just the same. As I said, there is a solidarity clause, military solidarity clause within the EU treaty. So basically, Ukraine becomes an EU member. It's going to invoke its right to self-defense and collective defense. Therefore, EU-Russia war. We are going towards there, given the fact that Ukraine cannot beat Russia. As I said, the moment these negotiations go to where I said, basically Russia manages to have Ukraine go full tilt on its military spending. This is a lost war for the West. You're going to put so much effort to gain so little or nothing, or even lose. This is how the case is right now. At the end, anybody's going to make the calculus. We're not winning. We've thrown everything we had. Okay, we did it piecemeal, which is an exact mirror of what the Russians did initially in 2022. They put their forces piecemeal. Therefore, they made it manageable for Ukrainians to start defeating them one by one, despite the losses. And it made it impossible for Russia to actually exert a full strength of its forces and focus them on critical points, except in the south, of course, in Lugansk and partially in Donetsk. So this is the whole point. This is my view for the negotiation. This is what Russia should do, in my opinion. And I'm going to go with the rehearsal. First of all, specific lines. Those lines are 100% in Donbass right now. Some corrections in the south and a cleanup around the Kherson area. That's it. Then second point, most important, I think, when it comes to how Russia needs to deal with this, is a cost effectiveness of this war. You don't need to be maximalistic. Russians really need at this point not to become maximalistic. They don't need to literally get stuck on things like small army or return of the funds or return of specific markets. If it works, so if they can go back giving gas or starting Nord Stream to Germany, it's fine. Because then Germany will have to double dip, pay both for Russia and for Ukraine. But most importantly, it should go hand by hand by not disengaging Ukraine. Ukraine should remain engaged in this fucking paranoia that Russia is going to fucking control. Ukraine needs to be a Israel without the Israeli pull in international politics, where the US comes and parks a whole carrier group. This is exactly what Russia doesn't need to do. You want to get armed yourself without anybody else being there? No problem. It's unfortunately a necessary evil. And as I said, it helps both with keeping the Ukrainian society completely off the loop. That means no more growth, no more real growth. And third part, as I said, no more demographic growth. People that think that they're going to get into this fucking army and one of these days the Russians are going to come. Those people are, I guarantee you, they're going to straight go for Germany, they're going to go for another place. The whole point is to keep the paranoia within the Ukrainian society high enough so those people do not get beyond that. Keep them scared. Not from Russia, but from the choices of their own government. The risk with that, as I said, is that you may have not a coup, but a demand for change. Ukrainians are schizophrenic enough to do that. And then you can have maybe the risk of someone being smart enough and offering a lot to Russia. And Monkey and whoever follows him, biting the apple and getting a situation when they engage themselves into a opposite situation where they're tied bound by an argument that is going to cause them, a bit like Minsk, far more issues down the road. And you know what happened with Minsk. Russians thought that they had a very nice situation by intertwining clause 9 and 11. Without the first, the second was caduc. Well, the first never happened, so the second never happened either. And the general situation within the Minsk agreement still respected or still thought as Ukraine, except for Crimea, as a whole territory, which meant that both LNR and DNR were basically fucked. So thank God the Ukrainians, in a sense, never obeyed that deal. Okay, it's not fine because there's a war, people have died and are still dying, but at least the Russians didn't got caught into that argument. And I think it's the same that they need to do right now. They need to intertwine and make a Gordian knot out of whatever negotiation is going to happen, that Ukrainians cannot get outside of it, both strategically, militarily, or economically. I'm not even speaking demographically because everybody's saying that the situation is dire and it's fucked up. So that was the whole point, salient point once again. First of all, recovering most of Donbass. Second of all, making sure that Russians are not maximalistic, because that could lead to a counter proposal from the US, which would basically just stall the war without any kind of tangible result on negotiations, and then offer the Ukrainians a much needed respite. Third point, Russia needs to understand that whatever happens now, it's still not a done deal. They need to finish the job at some point. Therefore, what they need right now is to keep the war how it is now for Russia without having to go full mob for the next step. Therefore, right now, they need to start streamlining their own logic and see where they can get back into some aspects, military production, military innovation, and so on. Who are your friends? In this case, Russia has found rather good friends that are not going too far for it, but at least offering it the possibility to defend itself in this war and stay in the game until now, where it is gradually taking over the initiative. And then the last point, as I said, the whole situation is not let NATO, but especially the US, have any kind of access to Ukraine legally within whatever paper is going to be signed at the eventual negotiations. This is the first and last point. No NATO in Ukraine, no US in the Ukraine. Everything else doesn't matter. If you need to get to give back some land, but keep those motherfuckers out, not a big deal. Of course, this doesn't need to hit the strategic positions of the Russian military, of course. But as I said, no fucking NATO or US in Ukrainian territory officially in any capacity. Thank you very much, guys. It's up to you. And if you want to intervene, no problem. If you don't, it's just the same. I just wanted to open up the subject of negotiations because a lot of Western commentators are starting. I even made a meme about the US mission in NATO between a Russian soldier and the hopefully next Ukrainian president while working. So yeah, guys, up to you. If you want to intervene, yes. If you don't, no problem. Thank you very much for listening. Yes, no, intervention, no intervention? Okay, guys, thank you very much. Have a nice day. And, oh, okay. We have someone who wants to intervene. No problem, bro. Go on, Alexandre.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the word. I just want to point out from our corner of the woods, the Russian one, about the nature of the Ukrainian state with regards to negotiations. It's not just the Zelensky regime is against them. It's that in Ukraine there is an ecosystem of people who are connected to this war economy, who live on this war economy, and it's like hundreds of thousands of people. And I think that's the main obstacle to any negotiations. I think that what you outlined is, well, it's very reasonable and rational, but I don't think that the current Ukrainian state is able to even, go that far. Because the moment it does so, it will be an internal coup, an internal revolt, because those people who run the Ukrainian war economy, they will go to the bitter end and not try to negotiate, because when the real combat operations end, when the war ends in its hot phase, then they'll be left with this rump state without the economy, without the demographic future, and that will mean that they will lose political power in another kind of Maidan, another coup, whatever. That's why I think they will be against it. They will try to postpone it as far as they can. I just want to kind of hear your take on that. How do you see the West kind of pressuring the Ukrainians to negotiate, given that they have this war economy, elite war economy bureaucracy phenomenon?
First of all, I want to say that I agree completely with you. maybe not 100%, but 99.9%. There is indeed a profiteering class. There is one official, so the Reznikovs, the Malyars, Zelensky, Zaluzhnys, the Sirski, so all these guys who make the shots within the army, the state, the special services, our friend Kirillo. But there is also a sub system which thrives thanks to this, and on that part you are absolutely right, which is, in my opinion, also kept a bit alive as a venting system. And then you have these underdogs like the military commissars who decide who gets called, who doesn't get, who get the bribe to let one guy, who get the bribe to let slide that ammunition and weapons from West or captured from the Russians, or stocks from Ukrainians purchased themselves, go to criminals or go to one unit or the other, because that's also another point I wanted to tell. Depending on how much support you have within the state and within this subsystem, then you're going to have non-stop resupplying and the capacity to fight, or you're going to get shanked. Now, the biggest problem I have with this interpretation is that it's true. And therefore, my whole space is put into quotes, in the sense that, yes, we would like this, but the reality is that you got to deal with these guys. In my opinion is, and I have always made sure and clear, a lot of Ukrainians will need to die before whoever is at the helm of the Ukrainian state starts thinking about negotiation. Right now, Zelensky knows two things. Within the group, so Team War Criminal, I always say that, for instance, the most vociferous, the most so-called Ukrainian oblasts have a very low turnover when it comes to the call-up for mobilization. Sumy, I think, is like 12%, Lviv between 19 and 21%. And those people are like the core of the Ukrainian so-called nationalist idea. And then you got people from Zakarpattia, so basically where the sizable Hungarian minorities, who are at 41, 42%. It's almost double from Lviv. Of course, it's a smaller oblast, but still, it means that those guys are being sacrificed. We had this idea about kind of silent ethnic cleansing. This has always been the case, especially by using people from eastern Ukraine to get killed most of the time, fighting for a country that hates them, or at least sees them with distrust. Therefore, that's why I'm saying you are going to see a change when the situation is going to be as dire as it starts to happen right now, where at least people are calling for everybody to just fucking get mobilized. The article of Sean Walker spoke about 300,000 to 500,000 guys getting mobilized. That would mean that the labor market and also the control levers within the system, social control levers, are going to be completely slashed. It would take also time to supply them with tanks, supplies, weapons, whatever you want. So this time would also allow the Russians to see this phenomenon and reply in kind. So basically, it would be a a sunk cost, basically. The issue, though, and there where I agree with you, is that at some point, on the Ukrainian side, it's not only a war fatigue that's going to be installed, it's simply the impossibility to keep continuing this way with a normal state. The great advantage for the Eastern economies that basically, given that the Western economy, Ukrainian Western economy, is that you had a balanced shift from central east, so Dnipro, Kiev, Kharkov, and then Donetsk, to central west. Now you see that Lviv, the images from Lviv are like nothing happens over there. Sometimes you get some shahids falling down. You get cruise missile attacks in specific areas and so on. But basically, there is no more war for Lviv. except when they bring back the Gruz 200. So on that aspect, I completely agree with you that it's going to be extremely complicated to convince those areas that they're losing this war. That would mean that those areas start, first of all, mobilize a lot more and see a lot more cargo 200 coming in. Right now, as I said, if you take Lviv, in that cemetery, you should have between 1,700 and 1,900, depending, because I didn't follow up with the losses. But I left them at 1,712 or 14, which is a sizable part of the male population of the city or even the oblast. This, once again, how we are going to force the irredentists, the Ukrainian maximalists, to give up this fight? It's very simple, actually. At some point, and we had already Mali saying in last November, like, okay, guys, maybe you're going to try something, but the objectives of returning Crimea, so the maximalistic objectives of the Ukrainian head are, he didn't want to say impossible, but he said it's extremely complicated, extremely difficult. That we are probably going to see a tactical respite that the Americans are going to try and push. And that's why I said the point now for the Russians is to make sure that nothing stays alive, intact on the Ukrainian military capability within the next 3 to 6 months. Every single brigade that's going to start aligning needs to lose at least 15 to 20%. This doesn't mean that it's like a fixed number. I mean, if 60% of each brigade is gone, all the better. But I'm saying every single brigade should be hit on staying power. And it would force people to understand exactly what the problem is. The problem is that, and I said it before, whatever you're going to raise up, Russia's going to fucking match it. And then sometimes exceed it, twice, thrice, and so on. And this is the bottom point, is that until now, the Americans were full of copium. Now they're swinging to a slight mood and slight doomerism. But if, as I said, Avdiivka falls and the Russians are not Chetin and Pokrovsky is threatened, despite every kind of bullshit loss you're going to start selling to the public, the map is going to tell you exactly where the people stand. And this is what happened with Bahmut. Initially, you had this, Bahmut is not strategic. Bahmut is a absolutely lost game for Russians. Russians have no choice. Bahmut holds and all this stuff. We are now in November. They started their offensive exactly 5 months ago. What am I saying? No, what I'm saying, 6 months ago. And where are they? They are being repelled slightly over and over and over from these positions. And this is exactly where I think Ukrainians will be ill-advised to believe in fairy tales from people who want them to lose in such a way that then those people are going to say, you know what, we told you so, you didn't believe in us, and now we'll have to deal with Russia ourselves. The Americans, what they want from Ukraine right now, I believe, is that Ukraine revises a lot of its war aims and gets back to something they can themselves deal with. Right now, they cannot deal with Russia on their own, for sure. Even if they get proper supplies, it's going to be neck and neck for at least as the front doesn't get far more larger when both sides would need to start seizing which side of the front they want to keep. But for as long as you stay within the 900 kilometers that you have right now, Ukraine is strategically defeated because it allows Russia to concentrate even more troops than Ukraine and give the results that we're seeing right now, where basically Ukraine is losing ground for the second month in a row. Ukraine has been losing massive ground strategically. Not because the Russians have taken 20,000 square kilometers, but because Russians have beaten the Ukrainians there where they were the most hopeful of advancing. So Bahmut, Artemovsk in this case, Zaporozhye, and this huge beachhead that in Kherson that we're preparing. We are, from the first announcement, the 10th of October, which was also, ironically, the start of the operation in Avdiivka. We are the 21st of November, and they have budged maybe, 3 square kilometers when it's being claimed as controlled by Ukraine, but we just know that they are wandering around that area trying to avoid getting FPV, bombed, and whatever. Of course, they're also doing damage on the other side. This I've never tried to hide. The whole point for them is to keep the Russians fixated then so they can try and push on the rest of the front. So generally, my logic is this. Ukraine at some point will need to address the situation that they are actually already saying that we need either mobilization or to give up. For a lot of guys at the front, the whole point is for Ukraine to stay a state. Of course, for them it's easy to say so because they will say, we fought for it, so we deserve this break. But for the politician and also for the people within Ukraine itself, it's not easy at all because most of Ukrainians didn't fight this war. But most of Ukrainians are going to be impacted by the fact that, first of all, as I said, you're going to have to undergo reconstruction without the proper tools to generate enough money to repay your loans, your grants, or whatever back as fast as possible. Second of all, it's going to reduce also your potential for growth in a fast and decent way. And third of all, what it's going to create, as I say, the smaller Ukraine becomes, the more people are going to be squeezed out of it. Because the cake that Ukraine is going to become, if this thing stays the same, it's going to be far smaller, 20% smaller than it used to be at the beginning. And if you add all the demilitarized areas plus all the special free zone and so on, you're going to become 75% of what Ukraine is supposed to be internationally. That means that it's going to have to support, if everything mutatis mutandis, 25% people less. So from 37 million, you're going to be at less than 30. That country is going to be less populated and poorer than Romania.
I mean, on the demographic side, it's going to be way less than 30 because I don't think that, at least the Ukrainians that are now in Russia, most of them will not be coming back because there are no economic perspectives anyway. And I think in Europe, it's pretty much the same. I mean, those who are in Poland or in other Eastern European countries, they won't be coming back. So,
yeah, sure.
I mean, we're looking at about 25 million people.
Yes. I think the goal for Russia is, and I didn't want to put a number, but yes, it would be that Ukraine is at 25 million tops at the end of this war within the territory controlled by Ukraine. And also, the most important part is my calculus over the less than 30 is, as I said, mutatis mutandis. If you lose 25% of territory based on the last census, it would be 30. But my idea is not that there are 30 million. On the other aspect, as I said, if your country is smaller and the part that sees the most refugees loses also most appeal, because I already also discussed about this, that areas that were transit areas towards Russia, like Kharkov, like Sumy, like Chernigov, and so on, they're gone. Now they're going to be militarized areas. They're going to be backstops. So Europe is not, quote unquote, of course, it's not going to continue beyond those areas. That means that investment for those areas, first of all, is going to go down. And instead of having them like, I don't know, a pole for innovation, technology, whatever, you're going to have that as a military area with a lot of limitations for the population, limitations for growth, and so on, which means that the people from there are going to move away. And I think, in a sense, that unfortunately would facilitate the plans of those who saw the balance shift from Central East to Central West or even West. Because, as I said, if you move from Kharkov and you're not welcome to Lviv, first thing you're going to do is go abroad to Germany, Italy, what does it matter? And this gives more power, of course, to that portion of Ukrainian population that has a very warped view of what Ukraine is, nationalistic, Banderat code, the way you want. But in this case, I completely agree with you. Population is going to be smaller overall, and also it's the shift towards a more bellicose Ukraine is going to be bigger, which is, in a sense, unfortunately for Russia, a good thing, because a smaller, more bellicose guy is a lot more prone to get definitely handicapped or taken out if he tries to go against a bigger guy, however slow and I say a bit backwards that bigger guy is. This is the whole point here. As I said, to me, I completely agree with you. The pressure point would be, first of all, pressure on the funding. Second of all, pressure on reforms, because one of the things that I think is going to hit Zelensky the most when it comes to that is going to be whatever reforms are going to be asked from him that he cannot give. As you said, they are profiteering from this war economy. And at some point, you're going to have, there was this attempt at an audit of the American military help that supposedly delivered almost nothing, that everything was fine, there were no losses and so on. Our second point is that there are still war powers within Ukraine, which means that a lot of the SBU initiatives or inquiries or probes are very specific. They are not undergoing a legal process, and this is the biggest situation in Ukraine within 2 to 5 years. If you get nabbed because you were investigated through war powers, but if the means to investigate you are illegal, right now you cannot defend yourself properly in court. But within 2 to 5 years, if the war powers go out, then you're going to have a problem. And the Ukrainian state, in my opinion, is going to have a lot of scandals as this goes down, in a sense. So I think there are a couple of levers that the West still has in Ukraine. But right now, there's one thing that I always said, for the West, it's not a problem. Why it's not a problem? Ukraine is literally fighting a war that the West wasn't ready to do. Nobody in Italy, France, Germany, or the US would have shed 100 plus casualties to defend NATO expansion. For them, this part is perfect. Like, they found some stupid Slavic morons, sorry to say it like this, it's not meant, but for them it's exactly how they think, to die for an idea that never was. And voila, it's a done deal, it's fine, they don't need to care about all this shit. Russia is being quote-unquote demilitarized, Russia is being weakened. The Ukrainian population is gone, there is a democide going on in Ukraine, the whole country is completely changing. It's not the Ukraine that you actually bet into. The whole logic that for the EU was tantamount to establishing the integration agreement is also gone, because right now the whole area of transit and commerce with Russia is now a war zone. Even Sumy and Chernigov are literally DRG battlegrounds. Russians go there, whack some Ukrainians, go back. Ukrainians try to do the same. So on the umbilical cord between Ukraine and Russia that wanted to be used, the Europeans wanted to use as a backdoor into Russia, is gone. And this is also another part that therefore you have a point that thing is going to be more complicated for Europeans to take into account. Because before, it was a way to have European products of a certain kind get into Russia tax-free, because back there, Ukraine and Russia had this tax exemption. But now there is no more movement at all. I mean, like, those areas are either war zones or they're Russian controlled. And it's literally trenches after trenches. And therefore, once again, this is my biggest situational awareness problem for the EU, is that they bet not only on the wrong horse, but they started with the wrong presumption that the Russians would be too scared to start it. They would be too scared to answer in a certain way. They thought, okay, we're going to cut them through sanctions and through the fact that they're going to do something quote-unquote illegal. But clearly, Russia right now is upping the ante on almost everything. So on that aspect, I agree with you. It's going to be extremely difficult to try and find a fatal blow to the Ukrainian portion of the population or the clique that is both profiteering and also needing the war to go on. So yeah, that's what it is. If I don't know if
The final thing I want to say is that the current kind of state, the current construction of the Ukrainian nation, the way it was constructed since 1991, is primarily anti-Russian. And even if we look at the period from 2014 to 2022, where actually, there were ways to, at first, like implement Minsk or reach some sort of an accord with Russia that would have been actually in the interest of Ukraine, because Minsk Accords were very much in in the interest of Ukraine. It was all blocked, not only because, the Ukrainian elite kind of didn't want that. It's that the Ukrainian nation, the Ukrainian political nation, those who are at the core of it, don't want that either. So, my kind of little glimpse into the future is that the moment real negotiations start, and the moment some sort of a preliminary deal is reached, there will be a political crisis. There will be some sort of an elite split. There will be some sort of a kind of political, even military uprising by those who oppose it. I see it as as a good thing for Russia. I think that actually the Syrianization of Ukraine is actually the best thing that can happen with regards to the conflict but either way, I don't see Ukraine coming out of this negotiations without a major political crisis, because those negotiations struck at the very kind of heart of Ukrainian identity, especially the Ukrainian identity after 2022. Yeah, so that's that. Thank you.
No, thank you, because actually you pointed out to something, and we already had a glimpse of that with the assassination of Kiev, which was their own double agent, but was trying to get a kind of, I'd say, both agreeable, amenable precondition for whatever negotiations, but also was in danger of revealing who actually both wanted Russia to keep going into this war, not only to get bogged down, but also because, as you said, something, the war going on is big bucks for a lot of people, and I completely agree with you. And therefore, if anything, the assassination of Kiev is probably going to happen again. It's not going to be Kiev, it's going to be someone else, but I completely agree with you. There is going to be a popular split. On top of it, due to the fact that they pumped their own population with victories that, true or not, were not the victories that they sold. Once again, Kherson, everybody was happy, and I had this discussion that instead of being Zaluzhny or whoever was in charge of the operation, Zelia went first to Kherson to, I'm here. But the fact is that most of the guys back then said it, that it's true that it's a military victory and a defeat for Russia, but strategically, it puts Ukraine in a bitter disadvantage because they didn't manage to actually hit the Russians hard enough. And this is also the one thing that's going to happen. It's just in this case, evocation is that, okay, we're going to have a negotiation, but the Russians still retain all their capabilities. And I agree with you. First, there's going to be people who are going to start losing out of this negotiation. Two, there are going to be military guys that actually so-called not corrupt people, but simply military-minded and absolutely anti-Russian, fully Russophobic. We're going to say, we're going to stop the war when they want. I cannot agree to that. And the other point, and I think therefore you have another bigger point, is that you are going to have to release at least 20 to 30,000 people who were in the territorial defense forces, because what you're going to do is you're going to try and, instead of grabbing Taras and Mikola out of his labor field, you're going to start now filtering back your recruits again. If you have this, I'd say, gap or lull into the fighting. And that would mean what? That would mean that you're going to have ideologicals coming back again, reform a backbone of your new brigades or former brigades. And so, as you said, you're going to radicalize even more the military, because you're going to take out all these people who initially are there because you needed them, not because they wanted to be there. And I completely agree with you. By putting this rift within the military leadership and the political leadership in between, also between them, you are going, in fact, towards a Syrianization of Ukraine, which indeed, generally and strategically, is in Russia's advantage. But the chaos might well also bring something different, which is you're going to have some sort of small civil war within Ukraine, which can also be used by the US to intervene. Like, okay, we're there because we want to stabilize the situation, and tada, finally you're going to have Russian army against the US army at certain points facing off. And then this is my biggest situational awareness problem, not for Russia, but the US. What is the US going to do? Because they're going to, I'm sorry to say it like this, but it's going to be their Pristina 99 moment for the US side, intervening in there to stop whatever civil war within Ukraine. That's also something that might happen. But once again, what I agree with is that Syrianization of the conflict within Ukraine means most probably than not a complete defeat of the Ukrainian general effort into this war, except in the outlier event that it's used by the US to intervene. Of course, you're going to see that coming. You know, like, it's not like the US is going to prepare 150,000 troops without being seen. So on that part, I completely agree with you. There is very little chance for that to happen. But as I said, the biggest situation here is not to overestimate the potential positive aspects of the Syrianization of the Ukrainian side, which, by the way, as I said, I agree completely with you, is majorly positive for Russia within the short and medium term. Long term, I don't know, honestly, because I think if Ukraine remains this Idlib on the Dnieper, then you're going to have to deal with it either Erdogan style, either Bashar al-Assad style, which is like starting to call season each 3 to 6 months, a small op, which can restart a full-fledged war. But in any case, they're going to be the major losers of these kind of small tactical operations. So yeah, once again, we agreed with almost everything. I think it's just a matter of nuance that you see probably closer to me, because you're Russian and you have people in Russia from that side seeing and communicating. I see that, I have to admit, mostly here. And we see the exact same end game here, which is Ukraine being forced to something they don't want in a way or another. So by Russian guns or by American and Western blackmail. I don't know if you have anything to add. Guys, if you want to intervene, we were still open for commentary or questions or whatever. Okay, if you don't want to add anything, thank you very much for being on. I'm going to, as I said, we're reaching end of the year. I'm going to make a couple of spaces with regards to what's going to happen. Most of these are estimations and are not predictions, but like where I see things going. They can be completely wrong, like as they can be completely right. So far, as I said, this year I've been rather rightish than wrongish. But the most important part is that I am going to keep you updated, as I said, with the end year result, and also about a couple of things that are coming by now, because as you know, by the 12th of December, a lot of manufacturing companies are going to close up their books. And we're going to see some last minute orders, and we'll see if those orders are of any magnitude when it comes to both supplies and ammunition and weaponry for the country 404. Because this is something that I have huge problems with. Ukrainians do not seem to get what they want, but also orders and the way it's going on are very lackluster. I don't know if it's some kind of trap or if it's the bottom of the barrel, but I'm seeing less and less equipment and weaponry being shipped. It could be because of Gaza, but it could also be simply because Ukrainians have enough for this winter, and things need to clarify around Avdiivka and around northern Donetsk before the Western allies, NATO and co, start reshaping the Ukrainian narrative and course of action for next year. By the way, next year, as I said, I don't think it's going to start very well for Russia because they are going to probably engage in a couple of offensive actions that will probably look a lot like Avdiivka of the first days. Because I think the Russians now have understood the only way to end this situation is to take the losses initially in order to put themselves in a position to influence the battles that they want to fight, importantly in overtime, rather than try to, as I say, and I'm taking Avdiivka as an example, be nimble, be tactical, no. Just steamroll whatever you can steamroll initially, pull them back enough so they lose the tactical initiative and control of major points. I said that the Russians still are functioning with this approach of heights, and then start the slow grind until the Ukrainian side understands that it's done. And you have Mahmoud, you have Popasna, you have Rubizhnoye, and you have all what happened last year in the summer. But I foresee two major attacks in two different vectors, and I hope that they give more or less the same positional advantage that the first wave into Avdiivka gave. Of course, the difference is that Avdiivka is very close to Russian lines, and the supply lines are a net positive in that aspect. As I said, if things go well in Avdiivka and having the whole, I'd say, front yard of Avdiivka until the Karlivka reservoir, then those two different axes of attack may well happen and cause maximum damage to the Ukrainian battle plan as it stands, and also force a reply from the Ukrainian backers, which means that the whole attention is going to focus outside of Crimea and fully into Donbass. Thank you very much, guys. Have a nice day, and see you next time. Bye-bye.